Welcome to the UnStruktured podcast. In this episode, I talk to performance apparel design leader and former pro snowboarder, JJ Collier. From snowboard to sewing machine to leading design for brands like Salomon, RLX by Ralph Lauren, Spyder, and more, JJ and I talk about what it takes to design high-end, high-performance gear and how to channel your passions into designing an authentic life. I'm Michelle Rose, and this is UnStruktured. This episode was brought to you by Struktur Society, the community for creators in art, design, and music. For almost a decade, Struktur has brought together creatives from across the industrial, apparel, graphic, and sound design industries, building professional relationships, creating a platform for knowledge sharing, and raising the bar of product creation. From live events and workshops to publication and podcasting, Struktur continues to evolve to build the strong creator community needed to craft our future. Find us at struktursociety.com and subscribe to our Substack at struktursociety.substack.com. But I want to start off talking about branding, self-branding. And we're living in a time like never before. There's never been a time like what we're all experiencing, and where each of us we need to look at ourselves like a brand. And this seems to be something that you've always done or have done for a long time. That's just something ever since I've known of you, heard of you, that you've had a kind of a distinct identity. You have a very strong name. And I want to know, who is JJ Collier? What is your elevator pitch?
Well, that's a fun one. It for me, it's always had to do with like being real, and I know that's a term we use a lot right now. You know, it's kind of a trending word, but this authenticity thing for me has always been central to what I do, and that was true long before the design stuff came along. I wanted what I did with my life to matter, and that's actually from a very young age, From a very young age, I believed in the dream. Like I fell for the dream. I'm a super mega romantic. So whether that was like living vicariously through BMX magazines or seeing snowboarding in a James Bond movie, when stuff struck me, it struck hard. And I didn't just want to daydream about it. I wanted to do it. And so the elevator pitch for me is that I'm a creative leader who only does work that is going to matter and provides real experiences for people. Otherwise, I don't have the time for it.
Yeah. That you've talked a lot about that authenticity, and that word has been used a lot in a lot of different ways over the recent years. What does it mean to you, being authentic?
I mean, it means being a professional, first and foremost, like really, really understanding my craft. And again, whether that's sports or motorsports or certainly design, I want to be the best I possibly can be. And I'm fortunate to love what I do. And so learning all the time just validates that. You know, you can't walk around talking about being authentic and then not be authentic, you know, like If I'm going to build snowboard stuff, obviously I can snowboard. I want to test it. If I'm doing motorsports stuff, I'm very fortunate to be able to get in a proper track prepared car and go test those things, you know, or even if it's just to get away, like I still want the experiences to matter, you know, because we know it's a blip we're here for, not to get dark, but like, you know, take advantage of the time we have, make it matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite things to do when talking with another creative or another designer, which I love spending time talking with fellow designers and artists, and is I love to talk about our background, and I mean way background. You know, like, where do we come from? And, you know, digging into our childhood and understanding, you know, what is our foundation, what makes us tick, what formed us, and what inspires us. You grew up in a small town in North Carolina called Banner Elk. Never heard of it until I looked it up. What was it like for you to grow up there? Like, how did it inform you and help form who you are today?
Well, it was magical. I mean, nothing short of magical for like a little kid to move from an army base where we had this life that I really enjoyed as a, 4 or 5-year-old, to all of a sudden having, 20 plus acres and literally nothing to be afraid of, except the stuff I made up was out in those woods, And so it was very much a time of like, exploration and freedom and the ability to just kind of like daydream and explore, and really with almost in a no fear kind of environment. And our parents were the same way. My folks are amazing. They were so open and excited for us to have this this opportunity to have like a low key mountain life. The town happens to be like, if you've ever heard of it, if you know it, you love it. It's kind of one of those little towns. There are ski resorts and amazing golf courses and all that. So it's actually quite a well-known destination now, some, 50 years later, 45 years later. But, it's really where it all started for me in terms of like imagining worlds that were bigger than the one I actually had to live in. And I only say had to live in because it's hard for a daydreamer in school, sitting there squirming. You just can't wait to get back outside again.
Yep.
And so, so it was the beginning of my creative life. Not right away, but as time went on, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I could start to imagine, adventures.
That seems to be rarer and rarer, for kids today.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I live in Oakland, California, where it's almost non-existent to be able to do something like that with our children. And I don't know if you're able to provide that kind of experience for your kids,
Yeah, we've certainly tried. I mean, Boulder has got its own, access to all of that, but maybe not quite in the same way as having, your own property and a lot fewer things around to eat you and stuff.
Literally. So did you grow up, were you involved in outdoor activities as a wee little one when you were
Well,
there?
if playing army and getting my kit all together so I can look exactly proper Vietnam era together counts as outdoor activities, then that's definitely was our main thing. My dad's a former Green Beret and a retired army officer, and so I was certainly inspired by his life. And we had these woods, and so for me and my friends running around, there was a lot of that stuff. And it's so funny because funny to me, military reference is such a big deal in my life now professionally that being able to go back and reference the stuff that I literally of my dad's, like his original Alice pack and his original helmets and web gear and fatigues. I mean, that stuff's still a reference for me. It's just hilarious to be holding those same things in my hands 45 years later.
Yeah, that's why you use the term kit all the time.
Oh yeah.
Right. I
didn't get it from him. I picked that up elsewhere, but those references are central for me.
Yeah. But I know what people do talk about kit. It's just, I've heard it the most from you, especially as a designer. And that makes sense to me, thinking about that, because that's what you're thinking about is the whole package, how it all works together. What do you need to do the thing you're trying to accomplish? What was it like then in particularly, I want to go into the 80s. What was it like in Banner Elk? What was the kid scene, the teen scene? What was going on there? I'm thinking about youth culture.
Oh boy. So it's like the Christmas tree capital of the world is Avery County, where I grew up, so it's quiet, it's rural, sweet people, super low key. So in the 80s, I always tell this story about how I was, kind of looking at like a Sears catalog for probably my 7th grade birthday or something. I'm like, compound bow or BMX bike, And I love both still.
What did you choose?
I happened to choose. Well, there was a place on our property, like up on where we live, where I was like, oh, that could easily be a BMX jump. So I went into BMX. BMX led to skateboarding, skateboarding led to snowboarding. And so it was all, and that was also to the beginning, like Michelle, of like the vicarious California, like okay, I'm in this little town in North Carolina, but all this West Coast stuff appeals to me.
Yeah.
And so, here we are, these little nerds running around with our spiky hair and jams and dreaming of being in, Laguna Beach. And instead we were like, in this one stoplight town.
Yeah. Well, where did you hear about it? Like, how did all of that California, that sport culture, like, how did it reach you? How did you know about it?
I mean, literally, we just started, like I always do. I just started digging into it, like when I got my BMX bike, it's like, okay, I don't know where we were getting magazines at the time, but BMX Action Magazine was the initial unlock. That was the first thing, and BMX was on fire. It was coming up. 83, 80, it had been happening before, but right around there, 82, 83, boom, I caught it right as it was happening. In fact, the same was true for snowboarding too, later.
Yeah. I wanted to dig into that too, as well. But one of the things I love about digging into our youth culture, because we're similar age and same type of thing, but I grew up in California. And so, BMX bikes were the thing. All the boys had them. So some of the girls wanted them, roller skating, skateboarding, any of that stuff. What didn't come up for us, obviously, was a lot of snowboarding, unless you lived north, because we were Bay Area and Southern Cal. And so it was very street sports. But I love to hear about how other people across the country heard about it. The magazines, the TV shows, the music, maybe not so much when we're young, but all the different ways that people became aware of those types of culture. How was it did you have other friends and other people in Banner Elk that were getting into that as well, that you could hang out with? And
No, in fact, it's so funny. It's like back to the, when I told you I'm in the woods and it was early dreaming. Later on, nothing shaped my life more than James Bond movies. Like nothing.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that in your work. Absolutely.
Well, so I mean, it's in the work, it's in the cars, it's in the mountains and destinations, and like, oh my God, like nothing triggered me more than Bond. I was like, oh, that looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And so it was A View to a Kill. I should know the year. I think it's probably 82 or something.
Yes.
The opening scene, Bond's being chased by some bad guys. The snowmobile blows up and the skid lands in the snow next to him, and he puts it on his feet and takes off. And even as much as I loved BMX and all my other little passions, nothing has triggered me like that scene where I was like, oh my God. I mean, it just crashed my hard drive. I was like, I will do that. And I think I'll be good. Yeah. Yes. So it's like,
oh man. So
awesome.
You have to answer then. Okay. Probably, of course, but who's your favorite Bond actor?
Oh God, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's Daniel Craig. I mean, he reinvented the genre in such an amazing way. Awesome. But the fact is, I loved them all. Ask me, well, I don't know if I love them all. I certainly, the Bond era for me was more of a Roger Moore thing. It was late 70s, early 80s. So that's when I was really like, getting deeply influenced. And I think they were what happened to be on cable at the time too. We didn't, you didn't get to see the Sean Connery stuff because it wasn't, HBO wasn't playing it.
Yeah, you had to dig back into that one.
Yeah. So, but it was just it was so influential. And then right around that time, Burton was, snowboarding was starting to get covered a little bit in Trans World Skateboarding. And then but I think before that era, Burton might have even run some early ads in the BMX magazines, which of course was genius. And so it just started to land.
Then from that point, when did you first get on a board and try?
Well, I think certainly Bond was the first introduction to it. And then a TV show did a quick thing on it, but that was a few years later. But then there were Snurfers. So before there were snowboards, there were Snurfers. And so we were able to get some like knockoff Snurfers from a local hardware store. I still have mine. Made bindings out of cut up BMX tubes because standing on them was just a death wish. So I had to secure my feet, and that was the first time we had anything strapped to our feet. And then it was November 86 that my brother Dave and I got our first boards and went riding at Beach Mountain. And then it just very shortly thereafter, we were like, okay, we know how to do this. Yeah, it was amazing.
And how you were hooked, right? No,
100%. Even with snow blowers and ice and moguls and all of the stuff to contend with in East Coast skiing, I am so grateful to Beach Mountain. I can't even tell you.
Well, did
Because
you?
if they hadn't allowed it, I mean, if they hadn't allowed it, I would have been toast. It would have been all
Right.
backcountry. The other mountains didn't allow it.
Right.
Beach was like totally open to it. They embraced us, and it was totally awesome.
I remember that because I didn't grow up doing snow sports, but I knew about it and I knew about the Snurfers and they were in some of my magazines and whatnot. But I knew that there was a lot of the fight going on of wanting to keep them out. And, and I've interviewed and part of the Struktur community, Trent Bush, who was one of the
Yeah, that's great.
Twist founders, and, Scott Klum, who was with Sims and whatnot, some of those guys. Yeah. And,
I mean, Scott, sorry, real quick, Michelle, Scott's
yes.
in the magazine. Okay. Like my friend brought me some magazines back from Myrtle Beach. She's so sweet. Melanie, I'm like, Melanie, you'll never know what those magazines meant to me. And
Nice.
I found them at home recently and I saw Scott in there and I tore out his ad and sent it to him because it was,
nice.
I never forgot what a rad shot it was, so
Yeah.
and here I am daydreaming.
Yeah, and it's great, and it's just the people. I mean, for me to like to see that culture happen and then grow and evolve, and the art and culture and creativity and design that has come out of that, over the last 30, 40 years is amazing. And
Yeah.
I think it needs it'll get more of its due, but I do think more of that history needs to be documented.
They're starting to do a pretty great job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the recent ride documentary and all that was a nice
Oh, I haven't seen that.
retrospective. Yeah, it's cool.
Great.
Great people.
Yeah, I just think it has so much to do with, like, it's a very important piece of our cultural history, and it's a very strong piece of Gen X, which we are not particularly good at tooting our own horn and putting it out there. And so that's starting to happen a bit more. We celebrate, we keep things kind of to ourselves and to our tribes and our people. And so I love to pull that out and share that a lot more. So yeah, I mean, I was looking at another interview that you had done and some of the things that I didn't know yet about you, but you'd been snowboarding for a while and you got your father to take you to Vermont for the US Open.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you competed and won?
Yeah, I won the junior moguls.
So
in 1988. Yeah.
How did you get your dad to take you there? And
I don't know. It was just such a stroke of genius. We have family in the Northeast. It was like, we really, really, I don't know what, I don't remember Dave and I like working on our parents too hard about this, but we got him to drive 17 hours to Vermont.
Wow.
In March, and we competed and both did quite well, but I wound up winning the junior moguls. And I think I might've had the highest score for the pros too. It was an unbelievable experience where I'm this 135 pound, 16-year-old, and I've learned how to, what did it was I could spin, I could do a 360. And I don't know if anyone was doing, how many people were really spinning. And the fact that I could spin this heavy giant board that was too big for me, I don't know, but that's what cinched it.
Those opportunities of the early days, when you're just doing your thing, at home in your own backyard or whatnot. And then you go out and you do what you do and you find out that you're doing pretty good.
Well, and to be a little bit more open about it for a moment, it was like I could draw and I could daydream. And that was sort of like, I was an active kid, but I was too small to really be a BMX racer. I wasn't a natural skateboarder. I loved it. Like, I drop in on a vert ramp and whatever later on. But like snowboarding was the first thing where I was like, wasn't like the last pick for, kickball, like, or whatever it had been my whole life, where I was like just too small to be like, So when you find something like this, whether it's snowboarding or now like design work, and you're good at it and you love it, it's like nothing was going to, like, I was just going to be as good as I possibly could be, because it was the first thing that had ever really unlocked my like persona for me in a way that where I really, really felt genuinely good about myself. Not that I felt bad about myself, but preteen, teenager, you're like looking for identity, and
it's rough.
find it, snowboarding. Holy moly. Thank
It's
you.
rough. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about that, about the kind of the last pick thing. Where was that something that you struggled with a little bit? I mean, I think we all struggle with it to a degree, and we don't talk about it, or we all have that fear that we're going to
Yeah.
be that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was real. I mean, I think it's not something I dwelled on too much. In fact, I noticed it more later when I was like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I was kind of like, it never bothered me too much because I'm my own little group of friends and we were doing our thing and that was great. But
Yeah.
it's so funny in retrospect how acutely aware you are of even like elementary school social hierarchies.
Yeah.
And so, and it's something I've been cognizant of as a parent too,
Right.
to where it's like, okay, just pay attention to what's going on, so that you're aware of how people feel.
Mhm.
But I don't remember it really bothering me very much. I just noticed it later. I guess I noticed it when I found that thing that sort of made me feel like I was set apart from the crowd in a way that was nice. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have to, no one had to be put down for me to feel better. I just knew that I had something that was a little bit special and it felt good.
Yeah. It feels nice when you can find that thing. I mean, so many of us creative artists, creatives, musicians, right? We all feel some sort of way of, I don't know. For some people, there's an outcast feeling. I didn't necessarily feel like an outcast,
Yeah.
but I was always the artist myself personally.
Yeah.
And I always felt a little odd, little different, like I was trying to, and we moved a lot. So I always had to try to kind of refit in. And I always had friends, but it became apparent to me, over time that I often felt out of place. And that was the very thing that made me creative and artistic.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that I'm seeing with every artist I ever talk to, is that piece that made them feel a little bit left out or different or odd is the thing that also really helped them be that unique piece of and finding that unique talent, or that thing that you bond to, is part of that important life path.
Yeah.
And maybe I think about parents like driving 17 hours in March to bring their kids to something like this. They must have seen something or had some positive feeling of like, yeah, let's do this. There's
I
a
guess so.
reason.
I mean, there was no hockey game every Thursday night or whatever to see if the kid had it or not. Dave and I talked my dad into taking us. I don't know if he'd been to the mountain to see us ride, but like, because it's kind of hard to observe snowboarding in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, he was, he couldn't be more thrilled with the outcome. Dave and I both had a good weekend. I came away with that first place, but it opened doors for us. It unlocked things for my brother and I in a way that he couldn't have possibly anticipated driving us up there.
Yeah. Now, so how did that lead into going pro?
I mean, try to imagine this, like before Stratton, I'm reading the magazines and dreaming of living, at riding at Donner Ski Ranch or top, wherever the magical places out west.
Yep.
Come back from the US Open sponsored by Burton and with Oakley on the side. Like, give me a break. I didn't bring any Kleenex in here. I usually joke about this because I'm like welling up thinking about the impossibility of it compared to my dreams at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I might go up there and do pretty well. I didn't think I was going to get offered a Burton sponsorship while I was there.
Wow.
And that's what happened. So I came back with my trophy. I'm sponsored going into my senior year of high school. I've got my mullet. It just looks epic. Like everything was clicking, and
we need a photo of that.
Oh, I've got them. But so it was like this, it was just an impossible dream. It was like, I can't believe this is happening. And then it continued to happen because I moved out west and still really could ride against everybody.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
And you were saying, I mean, I've heard you talk about that you were in that second wave of sponsored riders, because as any new sport like this, and we don't see a lot of new sports come out, so this is a big deal. Snowboarding was a huge deal. And when it first comes out, it's a renegade, kind of like, oh, no one wants to take it seriously, they want to kick everybody off the mountain. But then you start having these events and sponsorships, and the first wave is always kind of the going through with the machete, carving a path. The second wave has another experience, and you get plenty of other waves after that.
Yeah.
Talk about your wave.
Well, the first wave was like the guys who were in the magazines, like this
Yeah.
was Terry Kidwell, really OG Tahoe rider legend, laid down the initial tracks like that were just unreal. Like, and then, similar timeline, Craig Kelly, Sean Palmer, like these early names who were just our legends, still legends.
Yeah. Right.
And then there was this, then from 88, 89 forward, the 16, 17-year-old guys were started to come up, me and Jeff Brushy and Todd Richards and like, a bunch of these other names that are like really, had good careers in it and were really part of what I guess I would consider the second wave.
Yeah.
So we were competing against Sean and Craig Kelly and like those guys. We were all in the same contest, but they were just old enough that I feel like they were the ones who really, really laid it down the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I could list 40 other names, but you get the gist. We were like just the second round of young guys coming up.
But what was that like for you guys in terms of like, well, the grand scheme of things? So I'm thinking about people listening now, and some people are going to know this history. Some people are going to be younger and they want to know a little bit about, like, what was it like to be sponsored? How often what were you doing? Who was sponsoring you?
It was just we were just coming up. I graduated from high school, moved to Breckenridge, I was just doing the amateur tour. There was the pro riders and then the amateur riders, and we would, sometimes Burton team like Noah Brandon and Jason Ford, and the guys would like Jimmy Scott would like, conveniently show up in Breckenridge. And of course we were like, dude, you can stay as long as you want. We were getting to ride with the pro team,
Yeah.
And so, and from that epic coaching and friendships and all that. But so it was just it was my amateur years. I was trying to win contests. And so I won contests when I could, and racing and half pipe, like had a couple of great amateur seasons in a row. Won it overall 90 and 91. This is ancient history, but turned pro in 92 to see if I could, hang with the big boys, and managed to do pretty well.
Yeah. And then you were working with, like the brands on, not just sponsorship, but on gear. Like,
well, later, not until much later.
Really? Yeah. That didn't come until.
Oh no, that really changed. I mean, there was certainly rider feedback, of course, but to the extent that it seems to happen now,
right.
It was just getting started. Like, Craig was a master board shaper working with Paul Wren at Burton and doing like incredible stuff. And I'm going to leave names out. I don't mean to, but it's like, but so certainly there was rider feedback, but on apparel, I don't know if it was as much as it was on hard goods, where it was like, they were learning things every day about bindings and boards and flex and side cut and all the stuff. But on apparel, it was kind of like, it was very much, no one had time for clothing at the time. I mean, it was initially, it was like, how do we make the boards as good as they can be? And, there were certainly people doing cool emerging clothing brands, like Twist, but that happened just a little bit later. Late 80s, I really feel like the main focus was on getting hard goods figured out, and then soft goods came on really strong, a little later.
It's the development of a sport and then an industry that follows the sport, So, yeah. But when you were starting to ride pro, then, because the focus is probably so much more on the gear, but you're still being filmed, photographed. What was I'm not going to get into hard goods. I'm going to go into apparel because that's your history, your pathway. What was your choice of gear? When did you start to really pay attention to the apparel that you were wearing? And what were your thoughts about, what you were using at that time in the 90s?
Well, as a young broke kid, it was like I was getting my stuff that was issued to me. I'd pick colorways and stuff from Burton, but I was taking my Burton stuff. And then later on, I was partnered up with the team at Spyder that was like most brands in the early 90s trying to figure out snowboarding. It's really hard when you're a ski brand. And so and it wasn't until I was sort of a little bit more on the inside, because Spyder was in Boulder, I could come off the hill and meet with the team and like provide feedback. But it was in that era where I'd sit down and I basically would draw my jacket and pants and provide feedback. And I think it was appreciated, but at the time it was like, we've got designers for that. And I've actually been told that we've got designers for that. And it's like, oh boy, this is interesting. So that's where it's not that he didn't appreciate the feedback, but it was like when I started wanting to design in my late in my career, that's when we really sort of got the design. We've got designers for that. Yeah. the early days of like Spyder and Strike, they were pretty receptive to at least functional feedback. And then I wasn't trying to move design lines around or provide new solutions for features. It was more just direct feedback on stuff that we were issued, you know?
Yeah. And on a side note that, outside of my focus here is thinking about, I came into designing for the outdoor industry in about 2001. And I came out of fashion school and not from being a big, snow sports user. I started working with Columbia Sportswear and started working on their snow sports. And by then it was already, I really remember people talking about, especially when I went to the North Face a few years later, being a user, they're not a user, or they're just a designer. They're not a user. And it kind of feels a little bit the opposite of what you're talking about is, okay, I'm a user. I have some ideas.
Yeah.
And they're saying, we have designers for that.
Well, there was one, I'm referencing one example for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Like certainly all the brands came at it differently. And in my career, we've highly valued, athlete feedback, years of working with Chris Davenport and these other athletes, that were providing real world feedback that was really, really interesting. If you work at Spyder, or Salomon, you're a user. Not everyone's a user. A lot of the design team are. So we had our own thoughts on things, but if you're doing a custom collection for somebody and they've got ideas, and whether they're aesthetic or functional, it's amazing to have that resource.
Yeah, well, you being a user from the get-go already informs that knowledge for you of how valuable that is.
Yeah, that's true. I do respect it maybe differently than someone who isn't an end user at this level.
You come to the table with that. So I want to talk about that next piece. Okay, so how long were you pro? Do you remember?
I rode the Pro Tour until 98. Yeah.
So, and then what started to happen for you then?
Well, I didn't want to be the old guy at the club. I always say this, like, I knew that something was going to have to change by 96, 97. I went back in because the Olympics were coming. I tried to stop earlier and got back in for the Olympics and wound up having a couple of epic seasons. And that was awesome. Nice. But in the first of those last 2 seasons is when I bought my sewing machine and started recognizing that I had this splinter in my mind, as Morpheus would say, that just wouldn't, like, I kept sitting down and drawing. I was always drawing. And when I was drawing, I was always drawing the clothes. And when I was drawing the clothes were on a character and the character was in a scene. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? And in fact, I even started curating tear sheets before I even knew what a tear sheet was. I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I tearing images out of magazines and setting them aside just because I like them? I had no idea what I was doing.
Go ahead.
Just doing it. I was just curating. And then it hit me. I'm like, oh, this is so obvious. I'm supposed to be an apparel designer,
This episode was brought to you by the Functional Fabric Fair powered by Performance Days, the premier trade show for performance fabrics and materials. Since 2018, the Functional Fabric Fair has been providing a unique, highly curated trade show experience in the performance materials space, aimed at providing customers with the very best options to create the highest level products in the market. Having a strong focus on education and sustainability, the Functional Fabric Fair is committed to tackling the biggest issues we face today in regards to product manufacturing and our environment. With 5 shows throughout the year from Portland to New York City to Munich, you're sure to find what you need at the Functional Fabric Fair and Performance Days. I mean, I'm really intrigued by that. I mean, that transition of knowing, because this is a place where, as I had talked about, this part of the focus of our episode here is having to change careers, right? Like career changing, and we have to reinvent ourselves many times through our lifetime. We don't necessarily know that when we're younger. We start to see it when we're older, and we see the pathways that we've made. But to know when a career is starting to kind of wind down, or that you want to shift, that you want something different. It's more than that. And to know that when you're that young as well is not necessarily something a lot of people can do. But I guess you're also in a young sport, right? Like a youthful sport, like you said, you're seeing the younger people coming up. You're getting older, and you're not necessarily seeing that you're going to continue. I'm kind of wanting to dig into that and go, you notice that you're making tear sheets and you're drawing, and you clearly have an affinity towards a look and a sketch and ideas. How does that bridge over into buying a sewing machine when you don't even know how to sew? And sewing for guys isn't a big thing, right?
Right.
Obviously, you're
Yeah.
not hung up on that, but it 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 wasn't back then. So how does that happen? I want to dig in a little bit more. Like, what do you think for you?
Well, nothing's going to happen if I don't do something. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
it's the most basic thing, right? But like, I can sit around thinking about it, or I can go buy a sewing machine. Like I was drawing, I didn't know anything about pattern making. I'm a pro snowboarder. It's all I'd ever done.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd done some work with brands like in between the two snowboarding eras. I
Mm-hmm.
took some time off and was a sales rep, which actually really mattered later when I was looking at a room full of sales reps, but we can
Yeah.
talk about that later. But like, it was during that period of like, okay, I like this, but I don't want to do this forever.
Mm-hmm.
The sales rep thing, where I was like, that's where I started to really think about what was going to matter to me, what was going to
Mm-hmm.
be authentic to me, and what I cared about. Side note, I'd already met Shannon, my wife, and
Mm-hmm.
like I was like, okay, I don't want to be away from her all the time. I want to I want to do something meaningful. And at the time, I was probably a little bit hung up on being visible and being like the next Ralph Lauren or something, but that happened a little bit later. It was more just that I felt this and I wanted to act on it. And just like snowboarding, like I felt like I could do it. So I just started doing it.
Yeah. And I think there's a thing about when you have a positive experience doing something, you tend to then build on that without realizing it, maybe, and creating other positive experiences. So you had a positive experience in falling in love with snowboarding, trying it, doing it, having some success, going pro, like it
Yeah.
creates a pattern within us, and probably within you to, okay, sure, try something new. Let's take some chances.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because you already have a belief that taking those chances can work out, and they can work out pretty good.
Yeah, that's true. And
And I
that's
think,
definitely, I'm wired up that way. It's
yeah.
a little, I don't know. I was going to say it's easier when you're younger. I don't know if it is. I think there are things about it that are extremely hard when you're young,
Mhm.
when you're trying to manage what little money you have and what little time you have. For me, it was a big period of change, and certainly scary, and certainly with some stress. But, here I was, I didn't really party very much. I wasn't a gamer. You ride the half pipe for 4 hours and come home, and it's like, okay, what now? So I had the benefit of having a job snowboarding and
Mhm.
a bunch of free time. And so that's when I was initially starting to sew, and it was great. My buddies, roommates were really supportive.
That's awesome. I'm like, all right, I want to ask you.
Nice sewing machine.
I was going to ask you, what type did you buy?
No, we
What?
still have a good laugh about it to this day, because my oldest friends from that era are like, holy moly, man, you really made this work. I'm like, yeah, it seems
Yeah.
to be working.
Yeah.
I bought a Janome
Uh-huh.
in Charleston, West Virginia. My wife Shannon was getting her master's up at WVU, and I found a sewing machine shop, and I bought it, and I showed up in her dorm, and I was like, what do you think? So, and then I proceeded to leave for Colorado for a few months. So yeah, so it was really a period of like
Yeah.
this, a bit like snowboarding, where it's like, okay, if this is my little world where I can be successful, then I need to make it work. I need to work hard.
Yeah.
And so it was the same thing with the sewing machine. It's like, I didn't know anything, but I was going to learn. I had to make it matter.
Yeah. What did she think about that? I
Well, she
mean,
thought it was a little crazy, but she knew that I loved this topic, and that I was really taken by the fashion. And this was fashion at the time that I really wanted to do. I didn't really particularly want to go back into ski. I was trying to get out of ski and snowboard, because quite frankly, I felt I wasn't in ski, sorry. I was only in snowboard.
Mhm.
And in snowboard, because of some of my maybe buttoned up tendencies, I was maybe a little bit of not an outcast, but I always felt a little bit on the outside of snowboarding too. I didn't do it the way a lot of other people did it. And I've got highs and lows on that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But so I was feeling like, okay, not only am I aging out of this, but it's maybe not my most natural thing. I happen to be good at it, but culturally, am I one of the insiders? No. And so it was like, okay, what's the next thing? Like, it's been great to me forever and ever. Thank you. But like, what now? And so now I had to make the design thing work.
And so in that design phase, how much at that point in time did you already know about fashion, Ralph Lauren, any of the brands? What was your exposure?
Well, it's occurring to me now that I should be forever grateful to print because, I didn't go to school in England or Italy for this. So right back to the BMX magazines, all I had was, a stop at Barnes and Noble when I was on the road as a tech rep.
Yeah.
And so, the various high level $20 fashion mags that showed all the collections way before the internet, like that was my intro. So I was looking closely at Jill Sander and Armani, certainly. But Ralph, we can talk about Ralph in all day. He was the master of the dream, more really in a way that was different than the other brands. Some of those other brands had masterful adherence to design language. These were not words I was using in '97. So I understood. If you asked me, describe Armani in 5 words, I could do it. But Ralph had really mastered, as far as I'm concerned, the dream, the portrayal of the dream in a way that the other brands just didn't have quite as much texture.
The storytelling. They
and
were
so
masters.
Hook, line, and sinker.
He's always been a master of storyteller. I mean, you'd walk into any of his shops at any point in time and you know exactly where you are.
You know where you are. Yeah. No one has to tell you when you're in a Ralph Lauren store.
Yeah. I think there's elements of his work that still, he wasn't one of my absolute favorite designers. I was more of a modern, I love Jill Sander back in the 90s. I was going super modern, super futuristic. But and he'd been around a long time. I'd been very into fashion since the early 80s as a young girl. Yeah. And so I was always very aware of him. But as soon as I started designing and doing more lifestyle work, I started to really come to love his work and appreciate the materials. Like for me, I think a lot of like the natural leathers, the wood, the gray wool, just that kind of look. You can still see it in my life and in my home, because he was so masterful with apparel, with home, with lifestyle, with everything. The horses, every little piece, you can just feel all the textures. And they're very luxurious and very nurturing. I think of him as a nurturing brand in that sense.
Yeah, that's true. It was. And my more modern tendencies had always been there because of childhood references that I didn't know were references yet.
Yeah. Right.
But like my whole life, nothing has informed my life more than a late 70s Porsche 911. But I didn't know how much it impacted me until much later in life.
That's what I wanted to kind of, before we dig into the design aspect of it, because a lot of us as designers, we find that we're really passionate about certain things in our lives and we don't know why, but we find out later it's because they were really well designed, in inside and out. Yeah. And you're really into, clothing, but and fashion, but you're really into cars and maybe more than that. I don't know if you're into bikes and stuff as well.
A little bit, but the cars have been, for 40 years for 20 years as a dream, and then the next 20 years as an owner. Yeah, so I've just been fortunate to have those opportunities to know what I wanted and to buy them and keep, sort of flipping and trading and all that stuff. So
how did that start? That started when you were young.
It started, again, back to print. I'm in Banner Elk, and there was like this, being a resort town, there was one person in town who we knew had a Porsche, but I hadn't really noticed it until I saw it in like a Road and Track magazine and really started to understand that the 911, the classic sort of round frog-eyed Porsche, it was something that mattered to me. Like a red Ferrari did not do it for me. A black or a silver or white 911 was that was the thing that struck a chord for me. It was just, and then finally there was one sitting there in Banner, a black one with a whale tail that I got to just actually walk around and stare at. And it was just like, you could just hear these things in my head going ting, 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 like just hammering in lifelong love, just no going back. It was just
this is a time when none of us have phones and there's no such like digital cameras to take pictures of anything. So it's what you remember or experience. And you see it.
And magazines I couldn't take home. Like they were at the library at the local college. My mom, in a legendary stroke, must have sent away, by mail to get the I guess it was 80 911 SC catalog from Porsche, and I still have this mint
nice
911 catalog. So whenever I wanted to see one, I could see one. It was great.
Great parents.
Yeah, master stroke. I don't know.
That means everything, So what else? What else with that? Like when you would talk about because these things that the things that you've worked on, which we'll dig into a little bit more, and the cars, the racing, there's a nice blend of beauty in the design and functionality, performance, and luxury. Luxury. What else would you package in there as something? Is there any other passions that kind of sit in there with those for you?
I mean, I think you nailed them. I mean, and just not to belabor the 911 point, but think about it. This was it was European, so it was exotic to me. It's this European thing. It wins races, so the capability there. You mentioned functionality. The capability is there. There's this beauty to it that was happened to strike a chord for me. Other people like a flat Italian Ferrari or Lamborghini. I like the 911.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's back to that sort of. It wasn't luxury in the classical sense. It wasn't a Rolls Royce, but it was beautifully designed and finished. And you felt like you could show up at a hotel in San Moritz or run it down to the grocery store. Like it just had this versatility about it that, and again, I wasn't thinking this way as a 10-year-old, but this stuff was it. But Porsche got me. Like they got their hooks in me as a brand because of all those things.
Yep.
And it's just, and I pay close attention to things like that now in my work, because it's like, why did they get me? Well, how did Oakley get me as a 13-year-old? I didn't have whatever they were, $75 for sunglasses in 1985. Right. But I scraped up and found a way to buy Oakley's, and I liked their grips better than anybody else. These brands just found a way to get into my head and stay there. And I'm really taken by that.
And they come back forever and inform the work you do.
Yeah, they do forever.
I mean, I can see it in the work that you've done. I know, your work from Spyder. I know your work from Aught Design. And it's for all of us that's where we come from. That's what makes us tick. And that's where our creativity, how it comes out. Do you have any specific things when it comes to, especially like the 911 and the colors that you love and the details that have really infiltrated into, the skiwear and the outdoor gear that you have built?
Well, there's an inherent sort of taste level, as I would say, which sounds like terribly pompous kind of like thing, but it's really what I'm talking about. Like people have different taste levels. Designers do, customers do. So I have kind of a fundamental baseline of wanting the things I am associated with to meet the criteria that I just outlined for the 911, But when I'm working with different brands, I feel like I learned so much at Ralph, at Polo. I didn't go to school. I went to school at Ralph Lauren for 6 years, and that's, people say that, he has said that, it's a fact. And so that design language, even though I was doing RLX, where it wasn't all the things you outlined so eloquently earlier, we did gray flannel, we did leather, but really that was punctuation for a runway. RLX was all about, building authentic technical product. And coming from Salomon, they hired me because they knew I knew technical product.
Right.
But I still, so we were referencing Ralph's car collection. If we did a yellow and black collection, it's because of his yellow and black, Ferrari 360. So it was that design language I knew what it was going in. And we had tremendous fun for years doing it.
Yeah.
Spyder, shifting gears a little bit, that was a different world. I had grown up aspiring to have Spyder. I couldn't afford it growing up. I found a way to get a few pieces here and there, and then rode for them later. So I kind of knew it. But coming in now, 10 years later, as the head of product, it's all of a sudden it's really my baby. And so God, the pressure now, having been a friend of the family, all of a sudden it's my baby. That was gnarly. But I respected the heritage, and we had an opportunity to really reinvent it. And those, the race car references, the color and the color blocking, it's not for everybody, but I knew who it was for, and I knew how to level it up. And I had an amazing team, and we had an amazing run at it.
Yeah.
And even though the 911 stuff, for example, doesn't play back into Spyder the way it might play back into Polo, the proportion and the finishing and the details and the experience with touch points and all that, absolutely applied.
And you're getting to, with all of these, you're getting to design to high price points. I mean, when I was coming in the early 2000s doing skiwear, it's like that was how I was learning about skiwear. I was looking at Spyder, I was looking at RLX all through that period of time. Of course, wanting to do that at that level, and the brands that I was working for did not work skiwear and at that level. And so we were pulling inspiration, from that. But it's also the when you were talking about a taste level, and there is absolutely something about it's not pompous. I mean, some people might think about, we buy a brand because we want a certain kind of, what is it? Identity. We want to be identified with that brand.
Right. Yeah.
It's different when you're coming in, like I didn't grow up with a lot of that. And so I had to become exposed to it to see what was really nice, be exposed to nice materials, be exposed to great design. And the more you're exposed to it and you see how beautiful and wonderful and the craftsmanship, or sure, some things are just higher price points, but their materials are nicer. The details are nicer. You fall in love with that. And once you get exposed, it's just like being exposed to really nice wine or really good cheese or just really nice food or anything in life. It's hard to go back to where maybe you came from. And so your taste level changes because you get exposed to the possibilities that are out there.
Yeah.
And then as a creative, you want to make the coolest possible shit that you can, right? And so you're like, well, of course I want to work with, this wool and this really high level 3-layer fabric. And I want to build these amazing, we had, I was working on trying to relaunch the old brand Rafi, which Columbia had bought, and we were going to relaunch it as a women's fashion skiwear brand. It did not go through. That never happened, but we worked on it and worked on it in conjunction with Nordstrom. But I was looking at, really nice silver pulls with bamboo inlay and that type of thing, like the dreams that, you push your levels up. And so when you work with brands like that, you get exposed to higher levels, and then you get to bring that to the next place you go. So I can see that, your experience of working with Salomon, and at that time, Ralph Lauren's RLX line, trying to be really relevant as a sport line, they need the technical. And going to Spyder, you get to bring also the technical and the fashion side. And so you bring that piece to both of those companies over time.
Yeah, they were amazing experiences. And like most things, Ralph does a bunch of runway, but a lot of the business is in entry price point stuff, which is great because I don't it's not about exclusion, like, you know what I mean? Like getting to work
Right.
with the big brands and have kind of carte blanche like we did at Polo was fun. It was certainly fun for a designer, but it also matters to me more than ever that we build not just the stuff we wanted to make, but stuff that people are drawn to and that they actually then buy and that they then keep for a long time.
Right.
Because we know about the challenges with our business. And so for me, it wasn't about building the most expensive or the most of anything. It was building things that people would like cherish.
Yes.
And that's what I feel most easily most fortunate about in my work.
Yeah. And to me, the most sustainable business model, or at least it starts there. You know?
It should start with quality. I mean, that was the running joke with Spyder, was that we were like, we'd see these guys in the mountain, like, that jacket's from 1992. It's 2012. And we would see these things. We're like, how did we get that guy into a new jacket? But his jacket was made 40 years ago with Japanese materials that Dave Jacobs paid, to invest in his product because he wanted to make the best stuff. And the stuff was, there it is 40 years later. And that person still loved it. I mean,
in that cycle, 40 years later, it's cool again.
Well, yeah, we did start to reference some of the Big Eagle, USA stuff at one point, but it's just the fact is, if my shoulder, Salomon stuff, some of those prototypes, my dad was wearing one the other day from 2000, and those shoulder goods look as good as they did the day that product, hit the market.
Yeah.
And Harris tweed too, where sort of where it all started for me, really. If I look, tick back again, my dad had kind of a sad upbringing in Boston and goes through ROTC in high school and shows up, gets recruited to Bowdoin College to swim. And he shows up there with like his crappy state issued blazer. And he's looking around going, yeah, I need a new blazer. And he goes and buys this Harris tweed jacket with probably every cent he had. And so for me, for 40 years, the first time I'm 52, the first time I heard that story, I thought, okay, file that away. Harris tweed is good.
Yeah.
And now here I am, like, Harris tweed is still one of my favorite mills, all time. That's a shocker. Big, profound statement. Anyone who knows Harris tweed is like, wow, cool. Congratulations, you and everybody. But, but it's like, oh my God. And those materials look as good. The odd moth hole aside, his Harris tweed stuff looks outstanding today. I mean, and so that's not luxury or hype. That's just quality. And okay,
right.
It's maybe not everyone can always have it, but like, if you're going to do something, that's the way I want to do it. I don't really I'm kind of repelled by things that are overpriced because of hype, and I understand it, and maybe I'm being a tight ass, but like, I feel like you should build things that are representative of their price tag.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or vice versa. Maybe it's vice versa. Yeah.
Quality and craftsmanship. I think, the age that we grew up in with the industrialization, just that, things got very, very cheap. So there could be a lot of them. And we're finally starting to move away from that because we've seen what it's done to our environment, to our lives and whatnot. And I'm thankful for that. That the idea of fewer, better things, that we spend a little bit more for the things that we really love, that we're going to keep. It's why I have more Pendleton wool blankets on my bed than any polyester,
Target ones. Yeah. I know what you mean. And it's hard, right? Because we know that not everyone can make that choice. But I do believe too, that a lot of people don't know that is a choice.
Exactly.
Education is massively lacking in terms of like, helping share some of those, they came long before Yvonne, but that idea of buying fewer things better, I think is just not being broadcast adequately. Yeah.
It's the exposure, and getting more of that out there.
Yeah.
And luckily, I think we've been seeing more of that through more design choices, like, better design at places like Target and whatnot have helped. It's not necessarily the best, always the best stuff. But as soon as you start making things a little bit nicer and people start wanting nicer things, and we just need to make them last.
Well, And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I mentioned Target. I didn't mean to dig on Target on the blanket a minute ago. Target's actually is doing, you're right, in women's wear, for example, really some really great looking stuff. And that t-shirt will last 20 years if you want it to. And if you take care of it, the punchline is, if someone's telling you that t-shirt isn't cool anymore, that's really the problem. Like if you got rid of it long before it's the end of its serviceable life because somebody said it wasn't a cool t-shirt, that's where we open up a whole fashion Pandora's box here that, you know, as a hired design director, I should probably be careful being too hard on, but we know why the landfill looks the way it looks. Let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the remarketing of new stuff and encouraging people to keep buying cheap new things. Also the awareness, I think, of where things are made, who's making them, how much they're, you know, costing to make. I'm gonna buy a $2.99 tank top from.
I know.
You know, nobody was paid well enough to make that thing happen. So
that is true. And like I said, this is a huge topic, because like, how do you make sure that people who need clothes, firsthand clothes, you know, that where they want to live their life like the rest of us, have access to things that are affordable and nice, nice enough to portray themselves in the world the way they want to and dream to. I mean, I'm close to this because I grew up very modestly. You know, I've become a bit of a snob, but I wasn't born one. So I'm acutely aware of seeing things that I wanted and couldn't have. And I think that's another thing where I'm like, I just know I'm not as cool as these other kids, because, you know, I'm first generation Nike too. Think about it. Like you and me both, like 8 years old. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's obvious that those sneakers are cooler than mine. And I'm feeling a little bit less than because of it. And that's the first time I started to realize it's like, oh, this matters, you know, little 8-year-old punk with my shoes from the PX.
Yeah.
Postal exchange on base, you know, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with my sneakers. But as soon as I realized there was something better out there, it really hurt.
Yeah. And that's that other awareness. You become aware of what you don't in that comparison.
And that if we want to dig in, I mean, if you don't think that impacted my desire to like be somehow do something cooler, it certainly did.
You have been listening to UnStruktured, the podcast from Struktur Society. If you enjoyed this episode, please download, share, like, subscribe, and add your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. Also, please consider a Substack paid subscription to help us bring even more meaningful content and connection points to you and our creator community. Here you will find articles and news, as well as the podcast and additional content. We cannot grow without you. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.